Hello and welcome back to the channel, I'm David. Today's video is all about the start of a brand new project for 2026, but I want to start by making a few apologies. First apology, I do currently have a little bit of a cold, so my voice in this introduction video may not be the clearest, and also my voice in some of the voiceovers may not be perfect, but I hope you'll let me slide. The second apology is that for the end of 2025, I wasn't particularly active on YouTube and other social media channels. If you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen I was quite burnt out with the hobby. I've been incredibly busy at work, and work for that matter has moved once again several hundred miles from home. So I'm currently in my work accommodation. What this means is I can only visit my house and my girlfriend once a month roughly, which means I don't really have access to my railway. And when I do, I think most of my time I'd rather be spent catching up and relaxing with my girlfriend rather than playing with trains. For those of you who don't know, for the past couple of years, I've been building a modular model railway. Now, the reason it's modular is, as I said, work moves around and I'm far from home, and I don't particularly have my own space at the moment. The bulk of the space I do have is in my parents' loft, and there I have several modules put together to make a 12-foot scenic section with a nice viaduct and small village, and also a 12-foot storage yard. That was then connected together to make a loop around the loft to give continuous running. On top of the storage yard, I thought I'd take advantage of that space, and that's where I built a branch line station. This is the module, it's about 10 foot long, that I took down to my own house, where I can work on that separately, with the idea being that one day the two shall reunite and I'll have the branch line station once again above the storage yard. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have access to either of these at the moment, so I thought about moving on to another project. I did have a brief thought of moving on to pt120, but those on Instagram will have seen that I thought that was just muddying the water a little bit too much. It was distracting me from what little time I had to focus on the 00 scale railway, and I thought I'd rather focus on the 00 exploits instead of moving into another scale, so that's been put up for sale. I then turned my attention to future modules for this modular railway. I've been designing this for several years now, and if we go through some of the track plans, it started quite basic and it's got more intricate with different designs for storage yards, different designs for TMDs and MPDs, but one thing that's been constant throughout is that I need some sort of removable module or bridge for when I build this eventually into a full-size layout. My plan is one day I'll have my own house with a mortgage and I won't be afraid to build a massive shed in the garden that will be able to house my dream railway. In this form, the railway will be at least 18 feet by 12 feet and will require some sort of bridge across the access door. Now, this is what I've decided to make. Initial plans for this lift-out section were of a simple 2-track mainline, possibly even just on a plank of wood, which is something I've done before. I then moved on to thinking I'd like maybe a simple station, something that I could stop some passenger trains at occasionally if I wanted to, or just generally watch them run through at speed. It was only after discovering a few Facebook pages related to Wellington Station in Shropshire that I changed my mind. I was inspired by some of the old photographs and I really liked the idea of modelling perhaps a slightly larger station. If you turn to YouTubers such as Everard Junction, it's very common to model a station at the start or one side of the layout. Particularly Everard Junction, he has his station cut in two basically, so he doesn't need the full platform length in order to run full-size trains. I thought I could run with this and only have my removable section be 5 foot long, but still run full-length trains through it, having basically just the locomotive and 1 or 2 coaches showing on the platforms, but then when they pull away, we'll have the full train run through. To that end, I studied various photos of Wellington, and I've settled for a somewhat compressed design. Starting with the baseboards, these are 5 foot long by just 400mm wide. This is just shy of 18 inches deep and should be a nice compromise for this removable section. You may notice this gap in the middle. That means it's two 2.5 foot boards to aid in transport and storage. The key aspects are there with the 4 lines and the bay platform, and this should allow me to model the nice station and a few of the scenic details. If we imagine this in place in front of the doors of my eventual layout, we should have my desk to one side and this nice scenic section with a couple of bridges and a station building, and it should look lovely with some trains running through it. It's not going to be an exact replica of Wellington Station by any means, and to that end I'm calling it Wellingford. Wellingford will be my take on Wellington, with lots of inspiration and guidance from various photographs, but not necessarily perfectly to scale and with the perfect aspects for one particular year. What this will allow me to do is to scratch build, but also to buy some things off of the shelf. I'll be able to experiment with some different modelling techniques and different scratch building methods that I've maybe not used before. I'm also hoping this will give a nice photo plank, so when I do start collecting more locos, of which you can see one behind me, that Accurascale pannier there, I do have somewhere to photograph them and maybe run them back and forth whilst I'm up here at work. And the best thing, of course, is once I've finished this diorama, in a few years' time, it will form the perfect lift-out section for my dream model railway. So let's crack on and show you what I got up to. I'm hoping in this video today to show you building the baseboards, laying the track, wiring the track, and maybe even a little bit of scenic detail if we've got time, but if not, I'm sure there'll be plenty of videos in the future to show you all of that. The baseboards I've gone for this time for this portable module are once again laser cut flat pack kits, this time from Colin over at Flexgenics. I've used his boards before for a previous diorama that didn't really get too far. However, I decided to go back to him for these custom boards. He's really responsive via email, great customer service, and reasonably priced. These are some really nice plywood laser cut boards, and he's even gone so far as to cut the correct holes for me to mount my DCC Concepts dowels. So what I'm going to do is go for a dry test run, and then it'll be time to glue these up. We'll see in the dry run how well they slot together and whether I think I'm going to need any form of clamps and maybe even the nail gun to hold it all together as the glue dries. Overall though, wood glue on plywood should provide the main strength for these boards. Okay, so that test fit went very well. I think I might end up using the pin gun. I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to crack it out and see if it's working. If not, I can always pull the pins out with some pliers and just use some tape instead. But it's now time to glue it up. All I'm going to use is my standard Wix weatherproof adhesive. This is just wood glue and it works really, really well, indoor, outdoor, whatever. And it's cheap and cheerful. Right, time to get those glued up. Okay, so here we have the assembled baseboards. I've actually got both together. I did end up pinning it, and there are a few misses that I need to take out with some pliers. But no, they went together really, really well. One of the best designs I've seen so far, really, for laser cut baseboards. And thank you once again to Flexgenics, Colin I believe it is, for assembling these to my own, I say designs, more of demands, of this very weird size and some special requirements. The next thing then is one of those requirements. It's going to be to put the dowels in the ends. He's laser cut the inlets there to allow me to put in DCC Concepts dowels, so I'll glue those into place, get the boards bolted together, and that will allow me to leave these to dry until it's time to lay cork. Okay, so it's a little while later, and apologies for the lighting in here. I'm sat in the living room, and that's because I was watching some television with my girlfriend. So apologies for not filming too much, but it's still the evening. It's now about 9:30 in the evening. The glue dried up on the baseboards nicely, and I've moved on to laying some cork. So what I started by doing is actually the other day, when I was still visiting my parents, I didn't have the baseboards available, but I did start marking up the track plan as accurately as possible on a piece of cardboard here to form a template. So what I then did was transfer those lines from the cardboard onto the baseboards here with a ruler and a square, making careful measurements and plotting them all out. I've then got some cork, which I cut down to size. It was then a case of gluing this all down with some deluxe materials, Speed Bond, which is a really fast grabbing adhesive. It's just pure PVA that's not been watered down in any way. There's no water in this, it's in fact a solvent, and it dries really, really quickly. That's all then been weighed down with various railway books, magazines, etc. And it is currently gluing up. Okay, so it's the evening, it's New Year's Eve. I've spent the day out with my girlfriend, we've had a lovely meal, and it's now time to do some track laying as we wait for the evening to progress towards midnight and 2026. What better time to put down some flexi track? So I don't know quite how I've edited this video together, but I don't think you've seen any of this yet. So we've got two bridges here, and we'll go into much more detail on these either in this video or another one, depending how much footage I end up gleaning from this track laying, etc. But we've got a bridge very much based on the brick road bridge at one end of Wellington Station, and then this will become the girder bridge, which was later replaced by a concrete bridge, but I've gone very much for the girder style, and I've reinforced this with some brass, and again I'll show you those in some detail and how they've been made so far and how they're going to develop. I've also got some foam here. This is just some foam from Wix, as used on Cherrybrook. I had some left over, and I cut this to size the other day, just messing around. Before I even had the baseboards made, I cut these with a foam cutter just to get an idea of the embankment. So I'm just going to remove these, get those out of the way, and what we're left with is this lovely cork. Apologies if the video is not so great. I've got my ISO cranked all the way up, as it is relatively dim in here. It's not the best bulb in the dining room, on my dining room table here, but I figured this was the best place in the house for me to set up this baseboard and get the track laid. So yeah, I got the cork cut underneath these points, and it's all laid out nice and neat, going down to the 4 lines here, the 2 running lines and the 2 platform lines, and we've also got the bay platform down here. There's some cork just laid in for that. What I'm going to do now is try and get these points positioned into place, and then get those glued down. But before we do that, I need to look at the baseboard joins. Okay, so here we have one of the joins in the baseboard, and what I would usually use here are the DCC Concepts PCB sleepers. However, I didn't have too many of those left, and before I went out and bought some more, I thought I'd look at my options. Now, this is a product I've seen a few people use, absolutely no affiliation, but these are the ProTrack rail aligners. Now, I've seen these at a few exhibitions, I've seen them on some YouTube channels, notably That Model Railway Guy has used them before, and I always thought they were a little bit of a fad, to be honest. They're £10 for a pack of 8, which I initially thought was a little on the expensive side, but it remains to be seen. I might be very, very impressed with them. One of the things that put me off, I've got some out of the packet here, one of the things that put me off was I thought they were sided, as in a left and right side, and therefore you'd have to have pairs, and that'd be difficult for me when I'm building my modules separately to make sure I had the correct polarity, if as it were, a left and a right. But it turns out it really doesn't matter. They're not paired because of the way these are designed. They're asymmetric, which means any two will go together, which is great. Okay, so as always, I'm going to start my track laying with the points. Always do the most complex parts first, and then you can get the nice straight runs done. I'm just going to check my own understanding. I haven't laid Unifrog points for going on for about a year now. It was the last time I laid some track. So I'm just going to double check. Unifrog points, I'm pretty sure, are separated. The frog is separated from these rails here. Perfect, so I don't need to put any insulating fish plates. Up here, I've got a Pico Code 75 Y point. I'm pretty sure this frog is connected. The other thing is, I would normally, if these were left or right hand points in Code 100 or Code 75, I would normally be bridging wires on the bottom, things like that. There's no real need on these points. On the Unifrogs, this is all connected up already, regardless. So I can get these glued in place. All I need to do first is drill some holes. Okay, so I don't know if I explained very well in the previous clip. What I meant was there's no need for me to add any extra wires to these points, and the frog wires will deal with everything as far as powering all the different blades of the point work. But no, so I've done a 3.5mm hole for the frog wire and a 10mm hole for the point motor to go through. 10mm more than enough. So now I know where the points are going, and I've drilled the holes. I'm just going to connect some flexi-track just to these straight sections, and that'll allow me to make sure I get the points at the correct angle. Then it'll be time to solder on some of those board joiners, those ProTrack rail liners to the end of these points, and I'll use that flexi-track to make sure these are going perfectly straight, get the points glued down, and then we can do the flexi from there onwards. Whoa. Okay, so I've just learnt that bullhead points are very much held together by the bottom two sleepers. No worries though, I do have some track gauges so I can solder those back. Surprised though, if you do that with a code 75, code 100 point, they maintain their structure, but this clearly has not. Right, time to solder that back into shape, and then we can get it glued down. Okay, so I'm jumping ahead ever so slightly. I can't say I recommend doing what I've just done there and cutting the bottom two sleepers off of bullhead points. I didn't realise, the bottom two sleepers here seem to hold the structure together, so by removing those, the spring fell out of this point, and I've had to sort of rebuild it. What I ended up using, I've got this DCC Concepts track gauge, so I used that to set the correct width of the rails there, and then soldered the rails to one of those ProTrack rail aligners. I've got the track glued down here. I've done a similar thing on this other point here. Fortunately, what I did, with some hindsight, was super glue the rails to the sleepers, just here, either side of the throw bar there, which meant when I cut those bottom two sleepers off, it didn't fall apart, and I've managed to solder on this successfully. I've then used a temporary piece of flexi-track up here, just to make sure I was getting this point aligned where I want it to be, and then the track has been glued down with some speed bond. It's had a load of heavy books on top, and is now firmly in place on the baseboard. Okay, so we have a little bit of a jump here. I've got all of the track laid. It's now the afternoon evening of the 2nd of January 2026. Happy New Year. I don't think I've said that yet, but Happy New Year. And I've got, all the track laid. The thing that took the time, I've not really filmed it, was the sleeper spacing for the concrete sleeper track. So that involved cutting basically all the webbing between the concrete sleepers and using this tool here from, I think it's Rusty Rails Modelling, and that just spaces the sleepers out perfectly to match with this wooden sleeper track here. It's not entirely necessary, to be honest. I mean, the track's going to be out of scale no matter what, out of gauge technically, but when you compare this bullhead track to the normal Pico concrete sleeper, it's quite nice to be able to respace those so they look more similar, if not identical, spacing. I've got these rail aligners in the middle here. They were just soldered in. Did use my Pico gauge just to make sure they're the exact correct spacing, and soldered those up, and then I've cut through the middle with a slitting disc on a rotary tool, and now the two modules are able to be separated. Okay, so I've got the board separated now, and that's because there's still some track drying just over there, but I want to look at this board down here, the station throat area, and this is going to be my focus for the next little bit of this video. Now, I've shown you these bridges, and I'll show you shortly how I made this brick construction here. It's a scratch build. This needs to be in position like so, and we've got the other bridge down here that also needs to be in position. Now to that end, I've got some plywood, just very roughly cut to the correct size here, and this is going to be glued and possibly screwed to the rear of the baseboard. I've got an identical piece that's going to go on the front. Now the plan is here, they should perfectly sandwich the bridges, so they fit exactly where they're meant to be, and at the same time I'll be able to build my hillside up to the top of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get these bits of plywood secured into place, whether I do that by gluing, screwing, a mixture of both, and then I'm going to be able to mark out the hillside. And I've now got a bit of a router, a cutter, whatever you want to call it, a trimmer some people call them, and I'm going to trim the wood to the correct shape of the landscape. And hopefully that should create quite a nice fascia, as well as supporting me being able to install these bridges and start on the scenery. Okay, so it's a little while, but a lot of work later, and I've got those contours cut in. So what I ended up doing, marking them out as I showed you, I then took the jigsaw and cut along the lines. I've then come along and sanded this nice and smooth, absolutely no splinters along the top of this plywood here. I've then also used my router, whatever you want to call it, to cut the bottom completely flush with the rest of the baseboard. I've done a similar thing on either end, just to make sure this module is exactly within its sort of finished dimension. You can see I did have a little slip with the router here. That's taken a little chunk out, but that's something I shall deal with at a much later date. Having a closer look here, then you can see in the fascia there is this lovely little stub here where the bridge butts up perfectly, and again I achieved that with the router. Then the other bridge, you can see this one is level at either end. What I'm going to do now then is glue this bridge that's already painted into place, and I'll glue this to the fascia either side. I'm then going to start gluing in this foam, and I think I'm going to put some sculptor mould on this before I go to bed, and hopefully that can set up over the next sort of 2 days that I've got left here, before I then take this module back up with me to where I work. Okay, so I've got the foam and the bridge glued in there. The bridge is hot glued into place, nice and solid. I've put some glue behind the walls there, and also I've glued it to the fascia on either side, just to make sure it's nice and firm. The foam's also then just glued in. Again, this is just some polystyrene from Wix, which is a building supplier if you're not from the UK, and I've cut it into shape using this hot wire foam cutter I picked up nice and cheap on Amazon a few years ago. I'd like to get some plaster on this before I go to bed so it can set up overnight, but I've realised there's a few things that need to change before I can do that. I don't have a foam piece for in here. I wasn't really happy with the shape, so what I need to do, cut a piece to size using the foam cutter there. I'm also going to have to use the foam cutter and possibly some sort of a knife to make a small recess in this area down here, as there is going to be a signal box down here that will be a scratch build. So I'll make those changes and then it'll be time to start laying the sculptor mould. Okay, so you'll note when I laid the track, I didn't actually wire any dropper wires, and I'm now going to come back and do this. A lot of people do prefer to wire their droppers as they lay the track. You can solder the wire to the bottom of the rail, and it does make for a slightly cleaner install. I don't know why, I never really do that when I lay my track. For some reason I always prefer to lay my track, it's glued down, it's nice and solid, not going anywhere. I've then come along with my DeWalt drill here with just a 2mm drill bit, a really fine drill bit, if I show that to the camera. Really fine 2mm drill bit there, and I've gone in between the sleepers and as close to the rails as possible, to the outside of the rails, and you really can't see, but there are holes on all of the tracks there. Okay, so if you join me very zoomed into the track, and the 2mm hole is just perfect for this 1602 wire to slide perfectly into, and we'll get the wire back in there. I'm pretty sure the rest of the layout is wired red to the rear, however if it's not, I'll have to deal with that in the future. And now I've got the wire near the track, I'll just tin this, so we're just applying a bit of solder to the wire itself, not too much, and then what we're going to do, bend it away from the track and just do the same to the track. Tiny dab of solder on the side there. And then what I'm going to do is just take some tweezers to enable me to hold the wire and just attach it just there. To the side of the rail. I'll do the same thing on the front here and maybe you'll get a better view. So again, just slot the wire in. We're going to tin this, so a bit of solder just onto the wires themselves. And we'll bend that away. Tin the rail, so a tiny bit of solder. Don't want to melt the sleepers or anything. Just so you can see that the solder's flowing. This is 6040 rosin core solder, lead free, just so you don't get any fumes or anything. Tweezers, and then a tiny bit of solder, and there we have it, 2 dropper wires, nice and solid. Now you might think that looks atrocious, and it does, you're correct. However, if I pull these wires from below, it should look quite good. Okay, so I did make a very slight adjustment there off camera. The way I'd soldered it, it didn't pull quite flat, but now I've pulled it flat, which will be easy for you to do if you're not filming, I can guarantee it. You can see there's the dropper wire there, just on the side of the rail. And I don't think it's that noticeable on the side, to be honest. It would be slightly better on the bottom, but that'll do. And I know I've got my track in place before I do my dropper wires. So you can see there, that tiny wire there is my dropper. And because it's on the outside of the rail, that won't affect running whatsoever. It's now time for me to repeat that off camera on the rest of the tracks, and then we'll see what we're doing on the underside of the baseboard. Okay, so as you can see, all those wires are now neatly into the terminal block. Now I've just used some hot glue here, simple cable management, get those out of the way nice and tidy. The next step will then be to run the bus wire. Now if you're doing a very large layout, this will be very long indeed. But this is only a very small module, so I could probably get away without a bus, to be honest. But all I'm going to do is run this from here, and we'll put a nice terminal block at one end that will allow me to connect this to my controller. Okay, so we're back with the bridge module, and it's changed quite a bit since you last saw it. I think when you last saw it, I was just putting the plaster to dry. You can see it's received the same treatment, being painted grey on the underside. There's also some black paint about, and I'll show you that in a second. That's for the fascia. But first of all, I've done the wiring. So it's the same thing again, a wire to each track here, goes into this chocolate block, and then this is the connector where that's going to jump across to the next board and supply the station module that I've just wired up for you there. We've also got this wire coming down here, and this goes into my Uhlenbrock Daisy 2. This is a temporary DCC controller. I bought this when I was thinking of doing a small TT120 micro layout, but those plans have been and gone. What I do have is this Daisy 2, which I purchased on eBay for about £100, I think. It was nice and cheap, and this will keep me going when I'm up at work away from my main controller. I got sick of lugging my main controller around basically, and I will be making a video soon. I'm thinking of completely changing DCC systems. Anyway, I digress. You'll notice this wire going up here, and where this is actually headed is towards the fascia of the layout. We'll take a closer look now. Now we're at the fascia of the layout, and you'll have a proper look at this in just a moment. You can see it's all been painted black. I did first fill and sand the holes where the screws were that were holding this on as the glue dried. I removed the screws, filled them, sanded them, and they were ready for painting. I've also, because I had to play with my new toy, my router, I've actually just freehand routed a little recess here. It could be neater. I could have done it with some sort of jig or guide, and what that allows me to do is fit this DCC Concepts alpha panel. It's a very snug fit. I'm very happy with what I've managed to achieve just freehand there without a jig, and that fits in perfectly there, and I think it looks quite nice. What I can do now is plug in my Uhlenbrock controller, not officially supported by the alpha panel, but it does work for some reason, and that looks quite nice. As I said, I'm going to make a video soon about possibly changing DCC controller, and this will make a lot more sense when I do. Okay, so it's a few days later, and you join me at work, or in fact, after work. It's very much the evening now, and I recorded the intro to this video a few days ago, and I'm afraid since then my cold has got ever so slightly worse, so do excuse my voice. But you can see the module survived its journey up here. It goes nicely in one of my cupboards for storage, or in fact both of them do, and they're currently joined together, and they sit very nicely on top of my bed here. So apologies for the background, that is my bedding, but you can see I should be able to crack on with plenty of work on both these modules here. So taking a closer look at what we've achieved so far, we've got the track laid on the cork, we've had it wired, I've got the sculptor mould down for the hillsides, which I've now painted a lovely brown colour. I can't remember if I've shown you that. The first bridge is bedded in, and I think I'll be showing you that properly in another video. I was going to add it to this one, but this one's already a marathon. I've slotted in some trees temporarily from MBR. These are trees I've just stolen from Cherrybrook, so I'll have to buy some more to replace those. But I think the scene is really starting to come together. As I've said throughout this video, the aim of this project is to give me something to do after work. So I'm not sat here watching YouTube and wishing I had access to my own railway. Instead, I do have these two modules here. Instead, I do have these two modules that I can actually work on myself. The other aim is to create some sort of photo plank to show you new locomotives and rolling stock as and when I buy them, and you'll be delighted to know one of my pre-orders has arrived, which is an Coalorsdale pannier. It's a really beautiful model so far, and I can't wait to get some weathering on it, and the sound is just incredible. I have had to turn the sound down a few notches just so it's not too loud that it makes the speaker crackle, but other than that, it's very, very nice indeed. Another new model that's joined me relatively recently is this warship I bought on eBay a few months ago. That was one of the things that sort of kept me going through the black hole of not being able to do any modelling, was I bought this warship, and it's been sat on my shelf behind my computer. So that's really it for now. Thank you very, very much for watching. I am hoping to proceed in the next couple of videos with making some platforms. I've got another bridge to scratch build. I've also got a signal box to scratch build and an entire station that needs designing from the ground up, and possibly a lot of 3D printing, possibly scratch built out of plasticard. I haven't decided yet. So if you've made it this far through the video, thank you very much for watching. If you've just skipped through, that's fine as well. If you like what you've seen, check out the rest of the videos on my channel and feel free to like and subscribe. Bye for now.